Hey guys, it's great to be with you this Wednesday in what's called Holy Week. And for this day, we are going to be continuing our story about Jesus. So, last week, as you guys probably remember, we talked about Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. And as you probably know, what that means is that this week we're going to talk about Jesus' death. This Friday is called Good Friday, and that's the day that we remember Jesus' crucifixion. And this Sunday is Easter, the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And just by way of reminder for you guys, our church is going to be doing something to observe both of those days, both Good Friday and Easter. So for Good Friday, we're going to have a modified communion service. Obviously, we can't meet in person, so we got to change it up a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to stream the church service on the church Facebook at 6:30 p.m. And we'll ask you to take communion basically at home with your families. So Tom will be explaining how we do the foot washing part, and then he'll also be explaining the bread and the cup. And then the last part of the communion, instead of it being streamed, the last part being where we have the love feast together, we're actually going to meet in Zoom. So you can join your families wherever they are at, like whichever Zoom room they go into. If you don't have a family that you can join, and are just kind of by yourself or with a sibling or something like that, you can join the rest of us in the college ministry Zoom room. So, same link to the same part of that page, but a different Zoom room. I'll email you or text you the details. The Spanish ministry will be using the youth room on Friday, so we won't be able to do that. So anyway, all the links will be going out, and then on Easter Sunday, just like we've done for the past several Sundays, we're going to be live streaming our main service. And then we're going to have some teaching for the youth ministry with a Zoom discussion, just like we've been doing for the past couple of weeks. So I know normally we don't do Sunday school on Easter, but we felt like this isn't normal Easter, so we're not doing a brunch. This makes sense to do because it's still really good to connect with each other on Easter. So anyway, going back to Good Friday, the story of Good Friday might be a familiar story to you. And so today I'm going to try and take on the character of John and share the story from his perspective. So without further ado, let me introduce John. Well, hello everyone. My name is John, and I was one of Jesus's closest disciples. And I've been told that you want to know what it was like to be there on the day that Jesus died. So that's what I want to talk to you about. Honestly, I won't be able to stop myself from talking just a little bit about what it meant in hindsight, too. But while it was happening, it was just really confusing to me and to the rest of us, disciples. I know that I'm usually shy about talking about myself, but for the sake of you guys, I will tell you a little bit about me and my background with Jesus. Because you see, for me, my background with Jesus started a long time ago when Peter and I and our brothers were fishing along the shores of Galilee. And Jesus told us to come follow him. And so that's what we did for 3 years. And we saw Jesus do some pretty incredible things. We saw him feed 5,000 people. We saw him restore sight to the blind, cleanse people from leprosy, and raise people from the dead. And then we heard his teaching about how the kingdom of God was coming. And honestly, we thought it was coming very soon through Jesus. And we weren't really wrong there, but we thought he would be the one who would lead the rebellion against the Roman Empire and establish himself as the new king over the world. And then all the promises that were given to Abraham would come true, and we'd finally be able to receive the blessings from the covenant that was made with Moses. And Israel would finally be good enough for God, and therefore God would bless us and extend our borders across the world. And we were so close. So much of that happened, just not the whole taking over the Roman Empire and establishing Israel's borders bit. But at any rate, what we thought is that this would put us in a pretty great position as the disciples. It wasn't for no reason that just a little bit before this, my mom came up to Jesus and asked if my brother James and I could sit on Jesus's right and left hand side someday. Basically we wanted to be, two out of the top three most powerful people in the world. Jesus would be number one, but third most powerful, not terrible. Second, even better. So anyway, that's quite a long way from just a young Jewish fisherman from Galilee to rise in the world. But we knew who we were hanging out with, or at least we thought we knew who we were hanging out with, so it didn't seem so unreasonable. And honestly, who could have doubted just a few days ago that something was about to happen when we arrived in Jerusalem? Because the crowds loved Jesus, and they laid palm branches down before him as he rode in on a donkey, just like a king who had come back from a victory. was now at peace. It was basically like we had won and taken Jerusalem over. And that's what we were all thinking, at least. But we weren't the only ones who were paying attention to what Jesus was doing when he came into Jerusalem. We all knew the religious leaders were also paying attention to Jesus and saw a potential threat to their own political power, because they knew that if the people believed that Jesus was the Messiah, they might be interested in attempting to overthrow Rome. And of course, the religious leaders did not really love the fact that the Romans were in charge, because they wanted to be in charge, but they were also afraid of Rome. They didn't think that they could overthrow them very easily. So if anyone was going to overthrow Rome, though, they wanted to be the ones who would do it, because whoever overthrows Rome afterwards, they're the ones in charge. So if Jesus comes in and attempts to overthrow Rome, well, Jesus hadn't been their ally. They wouldn't be in charge. They would lose whatever power they already had. So even if Jesus succeeds in what they think he's trying to do and Israel gains independence, they lose status. It's a loss. And in what they think is probably the more likely scenario, that Jesus loses a rebellion against Rome, well, then Rome will blame the Jewish religion and hold the religious leaders accountable. So basically, in their mind, Jesus doing Messiah things is just a lose-lose situation unless they can get Jesus out of the way. So that's what they decide to do. And Jesus knows it, and we know it too. We know that they're trying. But because Jesus has popularity, they'd rather try to work behind the scenes, which allows Jesus to continue teaching in Jerusalem and avoid being arrested in the daytime. Because the religious leaders were not stupid about how to get rid of someone who was undesirable to them, but popular to everyone else. But my reaction to all this was a little bit different than what Jesus' reaction was. I kind of waffled between fear and confidence, right? I was a little bit afraid because this is a bad situation, but I trust Jesus because I know that he can stop these plots against him, because I think like Jesus can fight off whatever's going on, right? We saw Jesus calm a storm. He said, "Be still," and waves stopped. So like if a few Pharisees come at him, like he can just be like, "Oh, go away, Pharisees," like whatever. And he hadn't really seemed too afraid when he was overturning the tables in the temple. Like we trusted him that he had a handle on this situation. So then when he sits us down at the Last Supper and begins to teach us, we were kind of shocked when he said that one of us would betray him. We were like, do you mean really betray you, or just like a joke? Like, what's going on, Jesus? Because we couldn't really imagine that one of us who had been with him for 3 years would sell him out. But as you guys know, Judas was there and he was about to betray him. We had all heard that the reward was just 30 pieces of silver, which is about $600. We didn't think any of us would betray Jesus for $600. Like, that is not much. You would think that 3 years of spending all of our time together, waking, sleeping, traveling hundreds of miles on foot, teaching, seeing miracles, all of that would count for more than $600. So while Jesus was confusing to us right then, we were still pretty confident that we're okay. And then he started teaching about going away and coming back. And well, honestly, we still really didn't get that he was talking about death and resurrection. We thought maybe we were going to sneak him out or something like that, and then he'd come back. Or, he did say a lot about his father's house, and we knew that his earthly father was dead, but we weren't really sure that he was talking about heaven until we had the benefit of hindsight. Even like the whole idea of Jesus' body and blood and communion went over our heads. We didn't fully understand what was going on. Even though, when he asked us, have we understood all things? We were like, yeah, we got it. We didn't really yet. So anyway, when the time came and we went out to the garden to pray with Jesus, and then Judas approached, I was just shocked and appalled. I had never been so close to someone and been so betrayed myself. He was one of us, and he was coming to turn Jesus in. And we had thought, all of us, had thought at least, that Jesus was the one who was going to finally bring an end to the centuries of humiliation that our people have felt, and that he would bring God's presence back to his people and God's glory would fill the whole earth. But he's getting arrested. Didn't make sense. It made so little sense, really, to all of us that Peter, picked up his sword and cut off one of the guard's ears. We thought, like, okay, I guess now's the moment to fight. Here's where we start. And we're going to fight our way out of this mess, and maybe we're going to run away. I don't know what we need to do. But the Messiah is not going to be handed over to a trial like this. Until, of course, Jesus told Peter to stop and put the ear of the guy back on miraculously, which you would have stopped the arrest. Like, oh, that dude just reattached an ear. maybe we should follow him instead of putting him in jail. But no, just as always before, whenever a miracle happens, that meant nothing to them. It just didn't work. So they arrested Jesus. And then seeing that Jesus wasn't resisting arrest, the rest of us suddenly lost our courage. Like, oh, we can't fight? Well, let's run away. Because clearly no kingdom is coming to overthrow Rome. There's just a man getting arrested, and us, his followers, could be the next ones arrested. So most of us just ran away immediately, with kind of actually two exceptions, Peter and me. We didn't run away, although we didn't exactly join the people escorting Jesus to his trial that evening. We kind of followed at a distance because we were scared. And we didn't want other people to know we were Jesus' disciples. That would put us in a dangerous spot. But I actually, through family connections, had a previous relationship with the highest priests. They knew me, and I was really still pretty young. I was probably only about like 15. So I wasn't really regarded as a threat to them. I was more like the annoying child of a family friend who had made a mistake. I mean, in their mind at least. I'm sure that they all thought, like, okay, once we killed Jesus, then I would go back to being a good, nice, religious boy like they wanted me to be. Now, things didn't exactly happen the way that they thought they would, but, we'll get to that later. Anyway, then Jesus got put on trial, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen once he was on trial. I mean, I thought he would be let go so that we could go back to the plan and make him king, but now my faith is just full of questions because he wasn't escaping like I thought he might. And then on trial, as I got to watch and see glimpses of it, Jesus wasn't acting like I thought he should. He wasn't defending himself. They'd ask him if he was the Christ, or if they'd ask him about his statement about destroying the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days, and he wouldn't really answer them. He'd say things like, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. If you say so," because he wasn't really denying the charges, and he wasn't even really just saying like, "Yes, I am the Messiah. Deal with it." He was hinting at it. It was just confusing. I just wanted him to say something in his own defense, even if he just says, "Yes, I am the Christ." Because even though that would make things worse, at least he'd be clear about it. But he didn't really answer them. So the Jewish people who had him on trial handed him over to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, because only he could order someone to be executed. Same thing there. Jesus elaborated a little bit more. He was asked about what he had done, and Jesus said, well, that my kingdom is not of this world, and I came to bear witness about the truth. And Pilate just merely scoffed at him and just said, what is truth? And then Pilate, quote unquote, tried to get Jesus off because he didn't see what was so bad about a person whose kingdom was of a different world than Caesar's, right? It's not a threat to Caesar's. But Pilate, being a person who didn't care what truth is, or presumably justice, really quickly gave in to the pressure of religious leaders. So he tried to wash his hands of the guilt, but unfortunately, even 20 seconds with a full lather of soap was not able to get rid of his guilt nearly as well as that would have done if all he had was the coronavirus or something. But anyway, then there was a brief moment where I was filled with hope again, right? They decided to give the crowds an option. That was Pilate's way to try to get this resolved. Tradition said that they would release one prisoner, and he put forward Barabbas and Jesus. I stood there certain that the crowds that had welcomed the Messiah only a few days ago would choose to let him go free. But the crowds had changed their mind. The religious leaders made sure that everyone knew that Jesus was not to be trusted anymore, and that he was the one that they wanted to kill. I was honestly shocked at that point, because everything in my life now was falling apart for me. I had spent all of my 3 adult years, 13, 14, and 15, following a man who is now about to be executed. And not only is my life falling apart, but the man who I thought was going to bring the blessings of Israel is now under the curse himself. Right? He's going up to a cross. That's the worst kind of death you could face. And I watch. I watch him get whipped and his back turned raw as he's whipped 39 times. Just enough to be in pain, but not quite enough to die. Because, the Romans wanted to make sure that the actual execution was even more humiliating and painful. So it continued. Then they did something special for him because he was supposedly claimed to be the king of the Jews, and they didn't believe it. So they took a crown of thorns, or took some thorns and made it into a crown shape, beat him over the head with it so that the thorns would go into it, gave him some garments and dressed him up like a king and made a sign that said, King of the Jews. Because they wanted everyone to know that this is what would happen if anyone tries to rule over the Jews other than Caesar himself. And they tried to get him to carry his cross up the mountain, and he couldn't, which was crazy for me to watch because he had walked on water and he can't carry the weight of a cross now. It was just devastating. So anyway, someone help him with it, and he got the cross, got up the mountain, and then Jesus was being crucified, and I was there with his mom and a few other women. I was young enough that I could be there without getting arrested myself. Most of the other disciples were afraid of that because they wouldn't really execute someone who was only 15, generally speaking, at least. And so that's when I saw Jesus on the cross. And honestly, it was just painful because just seeing the person who was going to, I thought was leading me to freedom, was on a cross. And he had a nail go through his hands, the thorns on his brow, a nail on his feet, a mocking sign calling him King of the Jews. And then even one of the other robbers mocking him. People just said, like, why don't you do another miracle? Get yourself off the cross. It was just disgusting to watch. Like, it was just terrible. But then the other thief decided to believe in him, and Jesus said the thief would be with him in paradise, that his faith would save him, even at the last minute. And as I was filled with rage against these religious leaders and against the Romans for what they were doing, I saw Jesus wasn't filled with rage. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus is willing to forgive even the people who are executing him, which amazed me. To be in that much pain and have forgiveness? And he took care of his mother by actually telling me that I was now her son, which meant that, instead of really her adopting me, I was kind of adopting her. My responsibility was now to take care of her. Because Mary's husband, Joseph, had passed away a number of years ago, and Jesus was dying, so no one was going to take care of her except me. And now, not only was that going on, but the whole world itself seemed to notice that something was going on because Jesus was being crucified. So the sky turned dark, like mysteriously, like just dark. And I just sat there wondering, like, what is going on? Which made it seem so much worse because, one thing that you could count on is like the sun is going to come up the next day. But all of a sudden, that seemed like it might be in doubt if Jesus dies. I mean, it did come up, but I didn't know for sure. I mean, later when he actually dies, we even get earthquakes and everything. But before that happens, the cross was really hard on Jesus. We see him forgiving people, but later he quotes Psalm 22, which starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, Jesus feels abandoned by God now, and I was worried because it seems like it's all over. Even though he didn't finish the psalm, I did take some comfort in knowing that the psalm starts with God abandoning or appearing to abandoning someone, but at some point in the psalm, God actually shows up and rescues that person. And in the end, it talks about how all will praise God and proclaim his righteousness, that he has done it. And then Jesus' last words are, it is finished. And then Jesus died. 3 years of my life were gone. The hopes of my nation were gone. Really, the hope for all of humanity, just erased. So the disciples and I, we just scattered because we were afraid. We had lost our leader, and we were afraid that they might try to find us next. We'd stayed in touch, but we kind of went into hiding in Jerusalem among anyone we thought would be willing to hide us. Well, that's what it was like before we found out what Jesus was really doing. I didn't realize that at that moment that he died, that I was right in thinking he was Messiah, because I didn't realize just how great the blessing of Abraham really was going to be. I didn't realize that Jesus had to take all the penalties for failing to follow Moses' covenant and for Adam's sin in order for us to receive the full blessing. But once Jesus had resurrected, well, then I knew. This time when everything seemed wrong was actually the beginning of making it right. The darkest night led to the brightest day. The God who had died for me had defeated death forever. He had got rid of guilt forever. He had stopped Satan's plan because he took it on himself. And then I knew that I was ready to be part of the kingdom that he talked about, and I was ready for my mission. Okay, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that story from John. I want you guys to think about a few questions that we will discuss in the Zoom video, which you can access through the church website with the link below. Okay, guys, thank you, and look forward to talking with you in Zoom very soon.